Irmão,
Salve.
how you feeling?
Very, very good. And
Okay.
you? Et toi?
I'm feeling wonderful.
Yeah. In ecstasies, you said.
Yeah, in ecstasy. Ecstasy?
Ecstasy, yeah.
Yeah, I'm feeling wonderful. And today we're gonna have a podcast about Yoruba culture in Brazil, Afro-Brazilian spirituality, and yeah, it's gonna be very exciting. So yeah, stay tuned. And we're gonna start with Judy. Judy. Oh my goodness, it's beautiful.
Judy is beautiful.
Yeah. All right.
So my question for them would be, I listened to the conversations. My question would be, these mythologies, how were they documented? Like from what account, from what records were they gotten? Because we have different mythologies of the Orishas, different versions of it, and then because many people say, or the Western academicians say, our mythologies are not accurate because it's always word of mouth, oral, and also how do you know which one is which, blah 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 blah. So how were they able to get this version of the mythologies to document and write in a book? Also, yeah, so these are like the questions, the background questions that would also help to make the podcast recording, that will make it flow. Then also, what do they feel like, what do they feel would be the impact of the Orishas, especially in present day, both in the Afro-Caribbean community and back at home? Like, what do they think, or what do they feel like the problem we are currently facing is, and how can we tackle these problems with this knowledge that we have of the Orishas, the mythologies, and all? Like, what can we? You can rephrase it another way, but what can we borrow from them based on the stories we've heard that we can apply to current day, present day, that can help us to make better decisions, better choices? Yeah, those are my major questions. This is my intro.
Better to go one by one.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
my memory those days, yeah.
It's all good, all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But based on that alone, like, what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to start with the first question. So first of all, I'm going to talk about Afro-Brazilian culture here, and especially the culture around the tradition of candomblé. That will be the Afro-Brazilian, but most specifically Afro-Brazilian tradition and religion. And you have different expressions of these traditions in different countries as well. In the Afro-Caribbean, you have in Cuba, you have in Haiti, and they were influenced by Yoruba culture, but they are not transparently Yoruban culture, because we are talking about different social histories and different ways religion evolved and transformed itself. So what I can contribute here is my superficial knowledge about the Afro-Brazilian religion, something that I delve into my master's. I studied African and Afro-Brazilian studies in the University of Bahia. My master's was this topic, and I studied mainly the first ethnographic studies on Afro-Brazilian religions that started in Bahia in the end of the 19th century. So I'm gonna try to answer the first question. So the first registers, as she mentioned, Yoruban influenced culture in Brazil, and also from found languages or all the West African religious traditions that were found in Bahia were mainly oral. So the first written registers were started in the 19th century, and specifically at the end of 19th century, where intellectuals started to approach popular religions, and we are talking about a period when intellectuals were from the elites. They were mostly white and in Brazil, and they didn't, of course, care too much about African religions. They had many prejudices, and they were in a colonial mindset. So at that time, things were transforming a little bit, especially in Bahia, that part of the country, the part of Brazil that is, you have the most Africans and the greater influence from African cultures. So in this part of the country, intellectuals were showing more and more interest in Afro-Brazilian culture, and because of many different reasons. One of that was race. Race was a powerful concept at that time, and intellectuals were worried about the destiny of Brazilian nation, and they were worried about racial theories, because racial theories were a point in what we are like very
What do you mean exactly in this part?
I mean that in the height of 19th century, race was an unquestioned concept, very much in the theories of Europe and in Latin American countries. And the way Europeans saw the Africans impacted very much the way Brazilian intellectuals saw Afro-Brazilians. So inequality of race inequalities, and race prejudice were very much in those first studies, right? So we are talking about the period of the religion of races. Everyone believed in races, especially in the intellectuality, in the first studies, in those first studies. And Brazilian ethnologists were racist, very much racist at that time. And they approached that question worried about race, but also interested in popular culture, and interested in starting to show how Brazil was mixed in terms of culture, not just from a Portuguese colonial background, but also from African and indigenous cultures. So these works that I'm talking about at the end of 19th century, they are very much contradictory, because they started to document in real ethnographic sense those cultures, even though they consider these cultures evolutionary inferior or racially inferior, right? And the author considered to document the first ethnographic studies and the first myths and rituals of candomblé, of Afro-Bahian religion, was a doctor called Raimundo Nina Rodrigues.
Okay.
And his work is very much controversial. And in the meaning I'm talking about, he was a doctor. He was worried about race, first from a biologic point of view. Then he started to look into evolutionary anthropology. He started to try to understand the the evolution and the scales of evolution of Brazilian population. And then he was pretty much interested in the Afro-Brazilian population because he worked as a doctor in Bahia, and he worked with middle classes, poor classes in Brazil, and most of them in Bahia and were black and with African descent. So it's a controversial work because he could show for the first time for another intellectuals, for the whole society, or the power, to politicians, to the whole Bahian society, traditions that were from from people that were always considered inferior and were liberated from slavery. It has been like 10 years from that time. So his work is from the last decade of the 19th century, and Afro-Brazilians were liberated from slavery in 1888. So we're talking about 10 years.
Yeah, it has a time gap.
10 years of time gap. So it's pretty much an aftermath of the liberation, the first ethnographic studies on Afro-Brazilians and Afro-Brazilian traditions. So they have all those contradictory meanings that I'm talking about, and all those biases. But what Nina Rodrigues did in Bahia was to attend the most important cult houses of Candomblé, the Afro-Brazilian religion, and to do a very, very minutious, very detailed ethnographic account of all the rituals, the meanings of the objects, the meanings of the orishas, the meanings of possession. So he was very, very engaged and attended with a lot of detail. And this ethnographic account, o animismo fetichista dos negros baianos, that means the fetishistic animism of black Bahians, is a celebrated work because of the ethnographic data, not so much because of the bias of the author that were pretty much racist for that time, but because the detail he was able to register the myths and so on. So he was considered a canon or a patron of Afro-Brazilian anthropology and Afro-Brazilian religious studies. Yeah. And many followed his path, but of course through the changes in all the concepts we are talking about, especially the change of the concept of race, that from the 19th century until the 30s of the 20th century went through many debates. So that's a lot of topic, but mainly in the United States, anthropologists went against the race concept, first from Franz Boas and his students, but also the issues here in Europe about the ferment of Nazi fascist ideas and all those discussions about race that came to be an UN position against race, right? So all these transformations about this concept impacted in the way Afro-Brazilian religions were studied, and intellectuals in Brazil started to be first from a racist position like Nina Rodrigues. Then they started to celebrate mestiçage with the mixing, and then celebrate Afro-Brazilian culture during the 30s and the 40s. So the situation changed very much outside and inside of Brazil, and the way people approach changed a lot as well, with more reflexivity, with more what they called at that time that cultural relativism and so on. But they were never totally unbiased. They still had prejudice, and that happened throughout the 20th century. And we will start to have accounts of black people doing ethnography of Afro-Brazilian religions in the 50s and 60s. So
Of course,
it
so
takes
there are some who are
yeah,
around that. Okay.
surely has. So, but all this tradition that started with Nina Rodrigues that I'm talking about was very much preoccupied with this concept that I studied in my master's called African survivals. And this concept is a bit problematic. I discussed it very in detail in my master's thesis, because they were looking for reminiscences. They were looking for what survived in Brazil, in the Americas, of African cultures.
I mean, if you ask me, what will come in mind is like the Yoruba tradition amongst some other African practices. Like capoeira, for example.
Yeah. But the bias was is it possible to Africa survive in Brazil? Just survive? Like, is it possible to culture just survive and be stuck on time?
That's a good question.
And
because nothing is static, right?
Yeah.
Everything is always in movement. And I think it goes to what we actually talked about some days ago, when you say like the culture, if I'm not paraphrasing you wrong, that the Afro-Brazilian culture is a unique entity on its own to African culture. Like, it's different. In the sense that it has its own uniqueness. Yeah. And although they have similar roots, they're unique in their own ways.
Yeah. So I would say I will sum up that the emphasis was at that time on the similarities, and sometimes I still find the same worries nowadays. People are still looking for the similarities that has been overstudied in the last 100 years.
Like similarities between Afro-Brazilian culture and African culture.
Yeah, that was the trend that time, and it still comes up being the trend. And the first, how can I say, vaccine I would say that is important to say is how culture and social histories change in particular places. The meaning of something. If we're talking about orishas, I would dare to say that orishas are not Yoruban or just Yoruban. Yoruban, sorry, my pronunciation.
It's all good.
Yeah, orishas are cosmopolitan gods, transnational gods that traveled a lot. I would say, I'm not sure, but I don't know gods that traveled so much than orishas.
So orishas are not just into this paper and ups, right?
Yeah.
They're not like the Portuguese.
Yeah.
Like how the people from Benin describe the Portuguese as believer. God is only on paper and up, but
they're
elsewhere
everywhere.
it's not.
Yeah.
While I think the similarity between Afro-Brazilian culture and also, traditional indigenous African spiritualities or traditions is that God is everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. So those properties are similarities that you definitely can find in both continents, and apart from the similarities, you can find a rich and diverse array of meanings from the same orishas. So I'm not I'm aware of Afro-Brazilian religions, but I wouldn't dare to say that I know what's the meaning of Oshun in Nigeria, and they are very, very much different in Brazil. So yeah, it's not the same Orisha. It's different perspectives of the same God, right? And sometimes it's a name more than anything, and was a name that was resignified by another creeds, like indigenous Brazilian creeds, and even Catholic popular creeds of Brazil. So orishas have been reframed, resignified, retaught in Brazil. And the other thing that I'm curious about more than anything is this pantheon of orishas. I would say that the pantheon, it's more foundable in Brazil or Cuba. The pantheon to join the orishas, and here you have like Yoruba names like Shango, or Yoruba names like Obatala, but you also have like Nanamburuku, that is a name from the Fon region, the Dahomey, the king of Dahomey, and the registers from sources from the kingdom of Dahomey, that is today Benin. And so you have different elements of different peoples coming together and becoming a pantheon of gods, and gods that in I don't know in Africa, but to the extent I know, gods that were worshipped in some region but not worshipped in another region. Like Shango, I think it was more worshipped like in Oyo Empire, but not so much in the West. Like Oshosi, like from Ketu region. So in Bahia, what happened is it was the god from everyone. So from every Afro-Brazilian enslaved, even those coming from Congo, those coming from Angola, those coming from Mozambique, and different parts of Africa. And that's another issue very important. They had their own saints from Congo, from Angola, Kalunga, and Nzambi. And those gods also, you can hear about them in Brazil, but not so much, because Yoruba names of gods, I would say, not the meaning through in them, but the names prevailed in Afro-Brazilian religions. And that's another thing very interesting to look into, how Yoruba became the most important version, and or tradition, not only for people, but for the specialists, for the anthropologists, for the ones who were recording, right? So you have way more myths of Yoruban origin than you have myths from Congo, Angola,
Mozambique.
Even though the amount of people that came from these regions are even greater, right? So you had a trend in the study of these myths, and the Yoruban and a little bit the Fon regions as well, those who spoke Fon, prevailed than the others.
And it like, for me, it raises the question, like, Yoruba is an important element of the Afro-Brazilian culture, and it became so predominant that due to society itself and scientists, it has ended up eclipsing the other African cultures of Brazil.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, you know, we even talked about that like also a few days back. Like, is the Yoruba culture the most globalized African culture?
Yeah. That's a very interesting thing to think about. What happened in the study of Afro-Brazilian religions is that anthropologists considered the Yoruba mythology superior than other African countries and peoples that came to Brazil. So at that time of Nina Rodriguez, I was talking about end of 19th century, in a very hierarchical way. Anthropologists made an evolutionary scale of African cultures foundable in Brazil. Yoruba were on the top. Motivated by many reasons. At the end of 19th century, you had like European ethnologists in West Africa studying and also working in colonial science in West African states, in colonial Nigeria, for instance. And you had this theories of heliocentrism and this theories of diffusionism that basically started to theorize that all the inventions of the world came from ancient Egypt, and then spread to other regions and evolved. And in Africa, basically, this thought tried to defend that in Africa, the societies who had more contact with North African culture had evolved more than the other. And the Yorubans and the West Africans were one of them. Right, and that was a racist idea as well, because they tried to link any invention in African countries and peoples related to white inventions too, right? So they considered Bantu cultures inferior than West African cultures. And anthropologists working with that cultures in Brazil from 19th century on, and that was long lasting. That went until the 50s, until this idea were trying to put at stake. I would say 50s, 60s, 70s, until the 70s. The main concern of anthropologists in Brazil about Afro-Brazilian religions were with Yoruban religions. 99%.
Other culture were dismissed.
Based on this prejudice. But also, what happened to the people? You had like, let's say it's not true. Let's put an X number. But you have 20 court houses of Afro-Brazilian religions in the city of Bahia. 20, okay? 12 of them were from Yoruban related or from Yoruban traditions. 2 or 3 were from foreign speaking languages, and 3 were from Congo, Angola regions, and 2 from indigenous Brazilian. After that emphasis that it didn't start from just from the specialists, from the scholarship, but also for a movement in the 19th century, because Yoruban ethnic traditions were gathering, like in fact the ethnicity, like the identity of Yorubans were getting stronger at that time. Right, so many enslaved people that was liberated went back to West Africa, went back to Nigeria at that time, and
1930s, huh?
In the 19th century and the 19th century.
Okay.
So many families were able to come back to West Africa, were literated in Yoruba missionary schools by missionaries from English that taught Yorubans, and the Yorubans was one of the first that developed like the written version of Yoruba at that time in end of 19th century.
Whoa. So they were taught Yoruba in this Western missionary school.
Yeah, but
by
many
European.
of this, not only European, but many, like you have like the Reverend Samuel Johnson. It was a black man, a Nigerian, that of course was literated in English, and then helped to develop the Yoruban written language and to teach this in Nigeria. So you have those returnees families coming from Brazil, learning Yoruban traditions in the end of 19th century, and then coming back again to Brazil with those traditions, with myths, with the ritual meanings, and that's a source that we're still in the first question. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm being a little bit but that's another source that's very interesting. That in an article from the Professor J. Lauren Mattery from is an American anthropologist, is the English professors of Brazil. They were polyglots. They were from Yoruban families. They were raised in Nigeria, and they came back to Brazil. They were born in Brazil. They went to Nigeria. They were raised in Nigeria, and they came back to Brazil to teach English, because neither 1% of Brazilian population spoke English at that time. So they taught English. They were black men teaching English, Yoruban traditions to anthropologists. And one of these men is Martiniano Eliseu do Bonfim, and he's considered the most interesting source of Yoruba myths because he was very important for rooting these traditions again in Brazil. So Afro-Brazilian traditions were reinvented in the end of the 19th century, and through this movement of Yorubans, and not only Yorubans but mainly Yorubans, and this was one side, and the other side is the anthropologists very much interested in this movement and promoting research on Yoruba myths and Yoruba mythology. So I'm just trying to join the reasons why the Yoruba mythology prevailed over another African mythologies in Brazil.
Right? Because of that dynamic.
Yeah, so I'm just coming back to the amount of court houses. I was just giving an example, know. So if you have, like in 19th century, this number, 20 court houses, 12 from Yoruba and the rest 8. In 10 years after that, you have just you had like 16 Yoruban and 4 of different culture, and then 10 years afterwards you have like 19 Yorubans and 1 from others. What happens is court houses migrated to Yoruba mythology. Even court houses from other African peoples, like from Congo, Angola, because the state, the government, the anthropologists started to recognize more. And of course, I'm telling about not a dominant culture in Brazil. I'm telling about a culture of Afro-Brazilians that struggled for to be recognized the whole 20th century. But the extent that it was being recognized was predominantly Yoruban,
due to their efforts,
and made their own people to migrate, to change their their gods, the name of their gods to that, to the Yoruban gods. So that's the reason you can find Shango being celebrated or worshipped in many parts of Brazil. In many parts of Brazil, I think Iemanjá, that in Brazil we call Iemanjá, is celebrated the whole country. So it's a name from Yoruban origin, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't have Nzambi or Kalunga, Congo, Angola saints, or those names celebrated in the whole country, but just in specific places. And so it's not about survival. And I made my master to say that is not about survival. Culture change and adapt to the reality and the political struggles and the scholarship of anthropologists to movements between continents, movements of people bringing goods, bringing ideas, and bringing stories as well. And so, what I could sum up is pretty much that we have in Brazil a variation of that culture, that it's not the same, and it's related, it has similarities, but the three rivers of Nigeria that are celebrated for Oshun, for Ya, and for Oba, they are goddess of rivers. In Brazil, just Oshun has the rule for the rivers, and the others are associated to other things because of context, right? Because of what they represented and how faith was connected to the offerings and rituals with those saints. So the meanings are very different, even though the names are the same. The form is very similar, but the content,
the depth is something else. It's important that you say context. And talking about context, I want to also ask you, what is your perception or your personal experience with the Yoruba cultural practices in Brazil, like at the home front, what form of Yoruba wellness or Afro-Brazilian wellness or healing practices are being practiced in Brazil? I want to ask these two questions.
Okay, so our first question, just to try to detach a little bit to the word Yoruba. And yes, to say my personal experience is I was raised in Salvador de Bahia. I came from a white family in Brazil. In Brazil, I consider myself white because, of course, all the struggles black people have to pass throughout their history in Brazil. And of course, I know that in other contexts here in Europe, I can be racialized because I'm Latino, but of course, in the reality of Brazil, I'm white. And but I was raised in that city that is one of the most African cities in the Americas, right? That is Salvador de Bahia. And my mom was connected to Candomblé, to Umbanda, the Afro-Brazilian religions, and she's very spiritualistic, so she's very connected to that. And I heard that since I was a child in my home. And then my family is half from Bahia, half from São Paulo, and then we came back to São Paulo. That is another totally different context, but you can find Candomblé. The author of this book, Reginaldo Prandi, he was a scholar of Candomblé in São Paulo.
Okay.
That is considered a city of immigrants, not so much a city with black people. It's not known for a city of black people, but has many black people living in São Paulo. but is in the south part of the country that received a lot of immigrants in the 19th century, beginning of 20th century. So it's known to be the whitest part of Brazil, let us say. Okay. But Reginaldo could do a really interesting and profound work in the candomblés of São Paulo as well, showing that, of course, white families are engaged in candomblé as well, mixed families engaged in candomblé as well, and Afro-Brazilian religions were spread throughout Brazilian population in general. Right, and since Nina Rodrigues, since the studies of the 19th century I was talking about, Nina Rodrigues said that in Bahia, all the classes became black. And that's very interesting because he was talking about the creeds of white people in saints, how they were affected by the potence, by the power of the faith in Orixás. And he was trying to lift this hypothesis that the way white and another classes, the upper classes of Bahia, celebrated the saints were pretty much empowered by the candomblé religion, the Afro-Brazilian religions. And that was a taboo at that time, total taboo. So just to come back to my experience, mixed people, white people, many of them also believed in Orixás in Brazil, and it's connected to not just black people.
But to the general population.
Yeah, it's foundable in the general population, but that doesn't mean that it's not persecuted. It didn't suffer persecution from the state, from the politicians, from that it still suffers a lot of religious intolerance. Especially nowadays, the Protestant community, the evangelics in Brazil, they have a very strong prejudice against Afro-Brazilian religions, and it's still a very heated topic in Brazil because they throw stones, they try to destroy court houses sometimes.
So it can even escalate to violence.
Yeah, it can. And after this right-wing movements that they're trying to gain those people, especially the Protestants, and you have those acts of violence becomes more frequent, right? And that's a very difficult issue. But coming back to my experience, I started to be exposed to Afro-Brazilian spirituality since childhood, as I said. And the first time I went to a terreiro, I was like 14, 15, and I was pretty much impressed by, of course, the first of all the colors, because it's beautifully decorated.
Vibrant,
It's very vibrant,
and the mask too.
Yeah, and then it was like they have like public parties, public feasts, let's say, public rituals. They are not so deep because they of course have many secrets and they have to keep their secrets. So they don't do that in public ceremonies, but the public ceremonies are to the reason of them are to engage the community, and to engage the community to protect the court houses as well, and to show warmness and to be friendly with the whole community.
Okay.
So in Bahia, it's very frequent that you have those public ceremonies. And if you're in Bahia during the months from November until February or November until March, you're going to see many of these public ceremonies. Some of them in court houses, some of them in the streets. And that is the part that mixes with carnival, because of course those traditions of rituals are on the streets and become celebration and becomes party as well. But and then I started to study those things when I came to my master's. I was 23, 24. And and then I started to visit more regularly, like cult houses and different cult houses in Salvador de Bahia. And then the pandemic prevented me to go to have a regularity. And then after the pandemic, I got vaccinated, and I went to some other ceremonies. And many things impressed me a lot, and especially the way to deal with nature, the way to deal with animals. That's an issue of, and one of issue of prejudice from the Protestant and evangelics, because they condemn Afro-Brazilian religions of killing animals in doing sacrifice of animals in rituals, right? And if you go to a ritual, you're going to see how this animal is killed for a reason, to be offered to the whole community as a food, for it, so as the whole community can eat and can have the power of the ashe, like the ashe that is in the energy, the vital energy that is in the food. So if you go, you understand the reason, and no animal is killed for no reason. The animal is killed for a purpose of being offered as a food, for a scent, and to the community afterwards. So I think it's very beautiful, and it's very open, and it's I 100% recommend to attend those ceremonies, to get in contact with a cult house that in Brazil is called terreiro de candomblé.
Terreiro, okay.
And you have many. They of course have those public ceremonies, but they also had to protect their traditions, protect their rituals. So of course they are not going to tell the secrets. They're not going to tell everything. They're going to tell the amount they can. There is a very tight hierarchy in a terreiro. That you have the main priestess, normally called Mãe de Santo, that is the normally woman that is the leader of the terreiro, but it could be a man. It's not so frequent in Brazil to have a man as the leader of terreiro. It's more frequent to have a woman.
Okay.
But the man is called Pai de Santo. That will be father in saint.
Pai is it a shaman or?
No, Pai it's like father.
Okay.
And de Santo means in saint, or what is the priest, and it was called, I think, in Yoruba as Babalawo. And or Babalorisha or Babalawo, and in the woman version will be Yalorisha, Ya as a woman, right? And they're the leaders of the terreiros, and then they initiate their closest initiates are called the Vodunsi, and that's interesting because that comes from the Fon language, but also Yoruban terreiros use this word. So you have those mixings that are very interesting. The one I can remember, I'm not a specialist in candomblé at all. So, but the one I could remember is about the drums. You have 3 drums in candomblé. One is called hum, the other is called humpi, and the other is called le. Humpi,
and le.
Yeah.
And what about them?
They are in different sizes. So one is more high pitched, the other is balanced, and the other is more low pitched.
Okay.
And humpi ile. Humpi comes from Yoruba language, and le comes from Fon language. So even in the drums, you have the mix, right? Candomblé, it's not just Yoruban.
So, in the deep fabric of Afro-Brazilian culture and spirituality, there's many elements that are just, compiling together.
Yeah. Every time, as I said, +1.
Yeah.
You're always multiplying.
Yeah, you have to explain that to the audience. I mean, we talked about that some days ago, but I don't think they will understand.
I don't know who told me that, and it's very bad to not give the right source, right, or to quote properly. But someone, I heard a story that the question was, how many orixás you can find in Brazil? And the answer was +1. And +1 because every day a new orisha is born from these remeanings, from this re-signifying process, right? So for each orisha, for Eshu, you have like 30, 40, 50 different names for Eshu. And each name is a new Eshu. It's like an orisha multiplies itself in 50. So every day a new orisha is born in Brazil. It's so innovative, it's so creative that it's difficult to relate that as a tradition, just a tradition, because it's powerful and it's innovative. So yeah, we're creating tradition all the time, and I'm sure that Yorubans do the same.
I wish Judy was here to add to the conversation, but yeah, I definitely also think the same. Yeah, I wanted also to ask you this question. I don't know if you have encountered yourself, but it's about Masquerade.
Wow, Masquerade.
And what is like your understanding of Masquerade tradition? Is it similar or intertwined with ancestral venerations?
Wow, I'm not sure if I got the whole question. We have many Masquerade traditions in Brazil, not only Afro traditions, also Portuguese traditions, and many traditions in Brazil are very much regional, right? They are not Brazilian. It's very difficult to speak about Brazilian traditions, because Brazil is a kind of continent, right? You have those regional traditions, so they're not only connected to Afro-Brazilian religions, even though in Candomblé you can see that at some time you have open faces, and some others you have more
some strands,
and especially those who are in possession. Look, they have at least beads in front of their faces, the ones that are in trance, and of course you can see that in Afro-Brazilian religions, but you can see especially in indigenous native Brazilian traditions as well.
Okay.
Right? In the north part of the country you have like a tradition of the boy that is very, very, very interesting. It's boy is like bull. Yeah, it's the same. And it's a myth that is intertwined of indigenous and also Afro-Brazilian traditions. Okay. It's a myth about an enslaved man that had a woman who wanted to eat the tongue of a bull, and this guy wanted to make the best for his wife. So he stole the bull of the master, in times of slavery, and he cut off the tongue of the bull, and the bull died. And the master discovered what happened, and of course, when the master discovered, he went to get the man to kill him. And the guy ran off to the forest, and he encountered indigenous shamans. And those shamans helped him and heard him and said that they could revivify something, resurrect the bull. Mm-hmm. And they mobilized the whole indigenous community, and the indigenous community attended back to the farm with the guy, and the guy encountered the master. The master was about to kill him, and the shamans resurrected the bull. And of course, all those figures are celebrated in June in Brazilian festival of Saint John.
You talk about that, like it's this big celebration that happened in Pernambuco, right?
Yeah, it happens every part of the country, especially in the northeast and the north. But this tradition I'm talking about is in Maranhão. Is the Brazilian, I would say Caribbean, is the northern part of Brazil. It's like facing the Caribbean Sea, like the Atlantic Sea, but in direction of the Caribbean. And Maranhão is most famous for this tradition, but also Pará, that is the state just beside, and Pará is already in the Amazon region.
Okay.
So you have this very interesting mix. And all those figures, all those characters of this story are celebrated in June, masked. And normally the young girls are the native Brazilians, the community of native Brazilians. They dress like, and you have a guy inside a bull, but a bull made of cloths, and it's very beautifully decorated. Mm-hmm. And the guy inside this bull, I don't say, it's not a costume, right?
Yeah.
He swirls, and he attack people with the bull, and people just run. And there is a guy that goes around him like dancing to prevent him to be angry and attack the people.
Okay.
And also that's just one group of boy, and you have other groups of boy, and they try to steal the bull from the other group. So it's a kind of game as well.
Oh, okay.
And you have also the shamans that has the most beautiful masks. They're kind of scary, but at the same time beautifully decorated and colorful. And they have those bells that serve to resurrect the bull. It's fantastic. I went 2022, after little bit after the pandemics, and it was my first time there, because it's far from Bahia, and it was fantastic. They have the most beautiful masquerade tradition I have seen in Brazil. But yeah, you can find this in the south in Brazil. You can find it everywhere. It's not all the time. It's not always linked to ancestral veneration, I think.
It's more like, I guess...
In some cases, I think yes. In the case of the Orishas, yes.
But in this case, it's something different. It's a storytelling of an event that happened, I guess, a long time ago.
Yeah, it's a myth of the community, but also, I could say it's also linked to veneration, to worship, because some bulls, they start the journey. They are firstly turn into life inside a terreiro. So in some cases, in some groups of bull, they start the ritual inside a candomblé house, a culture house.
Like during that festivity, right?
Yeah, during the festivity.
Okay.
And so in some cases, in some communities, the bull is, or the traditional bull is also linked to candomblé and Afro-Brazilian religion, you know. So yeah, you can find it attached to worship, but it's not dependent on that, right? Like the whole community, the whole people in Maranhão celebrates the bull and this mask tradition. Yeah.
Oh, that is very great. And I also wanted to bounce back on, the city of Pernambuco, which is also, I think, the second biggest African city in Brazil.
That you will be judged by that, because they will
Afro city.
They would say that they are the first, and the rivalry between Bahia and Pernambuco is so old as the first studies of candomblé and Afro-Brazilian religions, because intellectuals from these two cities, they competed for registering the tales. They competed in every sense in Brazilian intellectuality, in Brazilian intelligentsia, and they competed for this legacy, because the northeast part where those cities are located were not so much important in economic terms in the beginning of the 20th century, in late 19th, beginning of the 20th. They are not the economic stronghold of the country. The economic activity migrated to the south, but they wanted to still be important for the country, and they found in the uplift of Afro-Brazilian traditions a way to celebrate their identity, their regional identity, and that was pretty much a modernist artistic movement in Brazil. One kind of modernism that struggled to be recognized, but worked. And the Bahians and the Pernambucans were two parts of Brazil with strong Afro traditions. And you cannot say that Pernambuco has less than Bahia, because it's really not true. But what Bahia managed to do is to be more recognized outside, worldwide recognized. Bahia is very touristic as well, and many foreign intellectuals also came to Bahia to study Afro-Brazilian religions. So we could say that Bahia won the war and turned to be more recognized, domestic and internationally. But if you go to Pernambuco, you're going to find different, but so as strong as Bahian Afro-Brazilian traditions. And in Pernambuco, it's interesting. For a long time, candomblé was not the main word for those rituals. Candomblé was a specific word for Bahian religious traditions.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and
so that's how powerful the influence of Bahia even was.
Yeah, and Yoruba has a place in that, because Bahia were considered more Yoruban, as we have talked about, Yoruban prevailed. So Yoruban prevailed because it was considered purest African religions in Brazil. And anthropologists were trying to highlight the purest ones and not the mixed ones, right? So that was something that I forgot to say, but it was a rule of cultural purity. They were searching for Africa, right? They were looking which Africa can I find here in Brazil. So if they were searching for Africa, they were searching for the
The pure.
Pure, but
like the blacker the berry.
If you're just hearing and not seeing me, on quotes, right? Pure. And unconsidering these changes, like the stuck vision of purist. And then what happened is Bahia prevailed also to inform the country about what is the most African way of being an Afro-Brazilian religion. So Bahia had the authority, let us say, of the Bahian expressions of candomblé became nationwide, became spread throughout Brazil. And candomblé, that was a specific word for Bahian tradition and Bahia rituals, became a word in general in the country. But the version of these rituals in Pernambuco was, for instance, called Xangô. One of the Orixás, Xangô. They were called Xangô. In the south, very south of the country, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, that is the southern southern state of Brazil, it was called Batuque. And in Maranhão, the part of the bull I was talking about, it was called Tambor de Mina, and another names and different, of course, varieties and traditions and meanings, of course.
But candomblé prevailed because of its recognition, as you said, nationwide and also international. Because I have some Brazilian friends, and I was asking them if an African want to go, for example, in Brazil and reconnect with the African population there, with the Afro-Brazilian, which place to go? And I was always told Salvador Bahia.
Because
until I met you, and then you told me, oh, there's Pernambuco too. And I was Pernambuco. Okay.
And that's something to think, because it's very much you're looking what you're looking for to reconnect. If you want to find the most important hip hop movements in Brazil, you're going to have to go to São Paulo, right?
Okay.
And it's pretty much the black conscious movement of Brazilian hip hop.
I think it's called Racionais, right? Racionais MC.
Like Racionais MC.
We can talk about them later, because they're
I don't know if we can. We can,
because their upcoming is very interesting. And what they represent.
But we need Julia here, because I'm not the real specialist in rap music.
We will postpone that for with her.
But the question which Africa are you looking for, right? Are you looking for the same Africa that the ethnologists, anthropologists were looking? So you're going to be very much biased, and you're going to find, of course, Bahia at the center of this experience, but you're going to find a Bahia very biased by these opinions. So Brazil is a black country in a whole sense, in all of the states, even the states that are considered more white, like the southern states. This one I told you, Rio Grande do Sul, is the southern, the last one, and it's recognized as a white state, or because of the immigration of Italians and Germans that went there.
The Europeans.
But you have a very important black community there. And also Batuque is one form of Afro-Brazilian religion that prevailed not only in Rio Grande do Sul, but also in Uruguay, the country that has border with Rio Grande do Sul. And you have the candombe and the Afro traditions there, and many of them circulated in the La Plata region, the region of the river La Plata, and also were foundable in Argentina.
Oh.
You have, if we're talking about survivals, I mean, you have tango in Argentina that came from Afro traditions as well.
No, that I didn't know.
And tango is considered like the most important identity music of Argentina.
many people, even me included, link tango with Argentina.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what you just said right there, that this origin of tango has an Afro.
Yeah, black people did it. Started to play tango in the streets. It was very much marginalized at the time and end of 19th century. Many traditions, samba in Brazil.
Yeah.
So it's not just in Bahia. You can find African culture, the whole South African continent, but in Brazil, the whole country. And Bahia is a place to start, yes, because it's the place where Brazil began, right? Yeah, and all the struggles and slavery, and of course, it's the, how can I say, the
hometown?
Yeah, but the hometown.
The how do you call it? The birthplace.
No. The womb. It's the womb.
Okay, that's even
deeper. It's the womb of Brazil. Bahia is the womb. And Bahia is not just the city, but it has a region that the water goes inside, that is called in English bay, right? You have a bay, right? And Bahia means bay, right? And so Bahia means bay. Bahia is not just the city of Salvador, but this bay that goes inside a portion of land that is called recôncavo. And recôncavo means this form of, a portion of land and a portion of water surrounded by land. So all these cities, you have many, many, many terreiros, many court houses of candomblé. Not just the capital, but all the cities, and all over this region, you had the first farmings of sugarcane, and of course, the presence of enslaved people were massively in those regions. So that's why Bahia was the most concentrated African.
Because they're the descendants of the people who were snatched from. Yeah, these African countries like Nigeria, Angola. Benin. Okay. Yeah.
So Bahia is a place to start, but you have Pernambuco. Rio was the Brazilian capital afterwards. Rio was the city that didn't create samba, but received samba and became the town, the town that spread samba to the world. And Rio is also very much African, and it was the country capital, so many enslaved people from Angola, from Congo region also went to Rio, and Sao Paulo as well. Afterwards, the economy of Brazil went to Sao Paulo, and coffee became the main production of Brazil in 19th century. You have a strong presence of African descendant people there. You have the mining region in the center of the country that's called Minas Gerais, the mining of gold, diamonds. You have a very strong presence and traditions, very interesting traditions there. You have the tradition of kingdoms there.
I only know one. It's this African that was extracted from, if I'm not mistaken, from Angola. He was enslaved, and I think it was in the 16th century or the 17th century. But I think you will know his name. His name is Zumbi.
Okay, Zumbi dos Palmares.
Yeah, and
he made a quilombo.
Yeah, he made this basically fortress, safe space. Yeah. For like freed enslaved Africans, and basically it became kind of like a kingdom, and they were giving like nightmares to colonialists like the Portuguese, the Dutch. Yeah,
so that was in Pernambuco.
Okay.
So take care when you're saying that Bahia is stronger than Pernambuco.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean in a comparative way. I meant like this, like you know, there's another one, an addition.
I know. I'm just kidding. But yeah, the story is fantastic, and it wasn't the only one. Quilombo Quilombo means this community of enslaved people that were able to run and make their community with African values, recreating, of course, African values and communitarian practices to survive and to defend themselves. And they had pretty much help from the indigenous communities. So that's the key for understanding the mixing of indigenous beliefs in Brazil and Africans' beliefs in Brazil, because they interacted very much, helping each other to run and to find those new spaces of conviviality. So the ways into the woods were the knowledge of the indigenous people, right? And these alliances are happening and were strong, right? So yeah, you have this word of Quilombo, that is this community of free people, new communities of free people and resistance. And of course, that's a metaphor for resistance nowadays. So black intellectuals and activists in Brazil in the 20th century kept this idea as a metaphor, not only a theoretical metaphor, but a way to promote new spaces of conviviality with recreated African values in Brazil. So you have quilombos, physical quilombos nowadays in Brazil. It's a great issue of Brazilian government to recognize those communities of African descendants, not only, also indigenous descendants, but they are being recognized by the government, and they had special laws for them to recreate also the knowledge, the way they teach, and it's a struggle nowadays in Brazil, and it's very nice to dwell on this matter of quilombos as well. But the foundational quilombo of the history is Zumbi dos Palmares, that was able to defend this quilombo for
long period,
20 years if I'm not wrong. Yeah. And won many battles, but at the end was
betrayed, right?
Betrayed, yeah.
Was betrayed.
Yeah.
The history is very interesting. For those who are curious, for me, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Toussaint Louverture.
Yeah, of course. It's way before, right? Way before, but it was a figure, and of course it's difficult to trace historical figure. Yeah, you have many historical accounts of the same story, many versions, yeah, and they don't know even his name, and he's confused by between two or three figures. You have those, and Toussaint is of course a more solid historical figure, more registered historical figure. But yeah, it was a way to question Western, the way Western philosophy and the way Western values were put in practice in colonial Americas, because those Western values were, of course, very much corrupted when they enter in the colonial space, right? And shaped different violent politics of extermination and
also assimilation. Like, I think in Portuguese it's
assimilação.
Assimilação, and how they were praising that.
Yeah, of course.
Even in African countries, Portuguese-speaking African countries like Mozambique or Cabo Verde. They were praising that.
Yeah, the more assimilated, the better, right?
Yeah, the more human you are, and when you are not assimilated, then the lesser you are.
Yeah. That happened also, of course, in Brazil. But I think it's good for today,
but
we can still do more sessions.
Definitely.
I'm glad to talk about these things. I'm not a specialist, just have an experience.
I mean, I'm grateful for you, like, not only to have given your time, your energy, your effort, but also to share that deep knowledge that you have.
Not deep at all, but I disagree in that point. But yeah, we're talking, and that's the best to share, to exchange.
And I just wanted also to, not to cut your wisdom, but to go back on what you were saying about, I think it was in the 19th centuries, like end of 19th centuries, beginning of 20th centuries, the Nigerians that were born in Brazil that went to Nigeria.
Oh yeah, the returnees, right?
Yeah,
the families
yeah.
Yeah.
Like how like, don't you think that this kind of dynamic, like, also from the continent, towards Brazil and go back, like, let's say Africans that were born in Africa that go to Brazil, that educate themselves about, the Afro-Brazilian realities and the Afro-Brazilian religion and, and all that, and then go back to the motherland and also, try to, like, produce things. Don't you think it will be also like a wonderful thing to happen?
Yeah. Also, you have like many surnames of Brazilian origins in Benin and Nigeria. You still have Santos, Silva, those surnames of those families, and they dressed more like Brazilians with different clothes and even smaller clothes, because we use like smaller clothes, and they kept these traditions, and they were known for being the Brazilians there. You have a strong historical account on that. Many historians worked in the 19th, in the beginning of the 21st century on this historical issue of returnees, right? The families that were in transit, and they shared Brazilian values there, so they Brazilianized African communities, let us say, right? And that's very, very, very interesting. That just show how never you can have the things unchanged, right? You can never have the things unchanged. You are also always working on this circulation of ideas, goods, people, knowledge, and you don't have a fixed point of reference for culture, right? You have traits of culture, and culture being fed by those movements.
Yeah, and what like really like inspired me the most is how creativity is just abundant in Brazil. Like I mean, right now it's we're closing, but to like strengthen what I want to say, like just the history of carnival, the beginning of samba.
Yeah.
And also like the rising up of black artists in Brazil, like Racionais, like how they alchemize their situation of oppression to use creativity in a positive way to at the same time teach and educate through a very soft way.
Yeah.
Like I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, like the samba, like through this discussion we had, like you were telling me like the samba music was Afro-Brazilian religion told that was like rites that was sing but in a purpose to educate.
I was talking about the samba schools. So I would recommend we could make another chapter just on music and invite Julia as well to talk about.
That's already
and chapter just on music, because music in Brazil, music deserves another chapter. And the story of samba schools, like starting in Rio, but you also have them in São Paulo. this movement of resistance and this movement of bringing religious traditions to the street, to the celebration, and to the forefront of Brazilian culture, right? Because it was one of the things Brazil is more recognized. It's carnival, and it's music, and it was shaped by Afro-Brazilians, right? It was shaped by those communities, those organizations, cultural organizations of black people that were called samba schools. They are not activist organization. They were not activist in that sense, or actual current sense of activism. But of course they were political. They were questioning the way Afro-descendant people were totally dismissed after liberation in terms of law, in terms of rights, in terms of education, in terms of jobs. And they were promoting spaces of conviviality and helping to teach children about the history of the country, or the history of quilombos, the history of zumbi. Zumbi was a topic of the songs of carnival. If you look into the songs of samba schools, carnival, and throughout Brazilian history, zumbi is 30% of the song topics of the songs, right? And so they were teaching kids about those history, and they were recreating Brazilian history in another level that was below educational level, official educational level, but had a strong sense for the community itself, right?
And that's the part of creativity that I really appreciate.
Yeah. So next chapter, music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Obrigado, irmão.
É nóis. É nóis.
É nóis.
É nóis.
É nóis. Okay, thank you very much for staying up, and see you on the next episode.